All right. Well, happy Friday, everyone. This is Christopher Lynn back with another future focused weekly update, helping you stay ahead at the intersection of business technology and human experience. This week has been yet another busy week on these topics. And I hope that, one, I can help keep you ahead of what's going on, but also at least give you a little bit of perspective into what I think some of this stuff means. But as always, I love hearing from you as well. So, if you agree, if you disagree, if you've got things that you want to add to the conversation, please feel free to send them along. You can, how to get a hold of me if you've been listening to this, but I always appreciate the engagement. So to just give you a quick rundown of some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about this week, or actually a rundown of all the things I'm going to talk about this week, and then I'll jump into it. One, I'm going to start on a humorous note, some of the stuff going on with Apple's video conferencing stuff. Then I'm going to get into the chips. It's the chip wars. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the chipset wars and what's going on in that space. I'm going to get into the whole, where is Apple in this whole AI war? There's been some interesting developments this week that have happened there, but I think there's a lot more going on than meets the eye with that. So we'll talk about that. On the topic of AI, I'm also going to just touch on what YouTube is doing to try and help make sense of some of this AI generated content and hopefully at least help people make wise decisions of what they're consuming. Then the humanoid robot apocalypse is back and it is in full force. So lots to touch on that one. And then last week, I was especially spicy on remote work and some of the stuff that's been going on there. I am spicy again this week, although I do have a hopeful and positive insight that popped up this week, but there's also been some not so hot ones. So you might get to see the spicier side of me today. So with that, well, again, I think anybody who's around me gets to see the spicy side of me. But anyway, so let's jump into this. So the first one, it's Friday. Why not start with something a little bit humorous? I don't know if you have ever seen this in interviews or podcasts or things like this, or maybe you've been on a web meeting or something like that, and all of a sudden somebody's video starts showing, random things, and you go, what the heck was that? And so if you're watching the video, maybe you'll know what I'm talking about. Have you ever been on and all of a sudden you've seen this? Or maybe, somebody's really gotten into it and they've gone like this. And if you can't see it, well, I'm going to encourage you to go to YouTube and watch the video, or Spotify where you can see the video. But what I'm talking about is the Apple OS video conferencing AR add-ins that they added to the OS, that Apple added to its OS. And it has actually been mildly hilarious to watch how this has affected things. And I myself have been guilty in it, where I've been in meeting and all of a sudden fireworks start going off like that. And what's interesting is watching people's responses to this. For the most part, when that kind of stuff happens with me, I just kind of roll with it. And actually, the first time it happened, I didn't know they had rolled it out in the update. And it threw me for a loop because I was like, why am I getting all these, new AR things? But understanding the tech, I'm like, there must be some new setting. And I noticed a little green thing up top. So if you have not seen this, if you're a Mac person, if you're using a Mac and you've been frustrated by these random thumbs up or emojis flying across your screen, just go up to the little green link up top. You actually can control the Apple reactions. But essentially what this was in Apple's attempt to humanize virtual work and virtual collaboration, they added some integrated AR features, augmented reality features, that essentially allowed you to have live stylistic reactions regardless of what platform you're on. So before, if you were in Zoom, you maybe could turn on a Zoom filter or something like that. But what they did is they integrated it into the OS. So no matter what platform you're on, whether you're in Zoom or StreamYard or whatever, you could have these reactions. The downside was they defaulted it to on. And I think that's what created some of the chaos. So it's easy enough to turn off. But honestly, watching people just rage out about some of this stuff I just want to tell people, if you're one of those folks, I get it. It can be frustrating when things don't go according to plan or when something new and unexpected pops up. I understand. But at the same time, I would just encourage people, slow down and lighten up a little bit. I can say, hey, I got caught, and I think it was actually it's a large executive town hall meeting, and all of a sudden I hadn't caught it, and I started doing glow sticks or something like that on the meeting. And you know what? Everybody got a good laugh out of it. It wasn't all that distracting. we figured it out and we moved on. But I got a kick out of seeing some of the news things of people. I mean, it's been around for a while too. So anyway, but yeah, if you don't know how to control that and you use a Mac or you've been frustrated by that, just look for the little green camera up on the top status bar and you can just turn it off. If you don't like it, just turn it off. It's that simple. Not a big deal, not worth getting upset about. But I personally, I don't know. Every once in a while, something happens. I love being able to throw some confetti just like that when things are going on and I want to celebrate. Or if I've had a particularly bad day, nothing says it like a thunderstorm on your virtual meeting. So anyway, enough about that. Let's move on to the chip wars. This has been a really interesting one to watch develop. Now, just midweek, the government announced it's going to be investing, well, I was somewhere north of $8 billion into Intel on them doing their chip work and advancing their chipsets to support all of this AI advancement. And the interesting part is that Nvidia has also been making some huge plays in this. They announced their new chipset. I think it's called Blackwell is the one. And I'm going to talk about some of the interesting things related to that. But even if you're not a tech person, you may go, who cares about a bunch of chipsets coming out with this? I think there's a couple things that we just need to consider as we think about this. The first one is the pace at which things are moving. I mean, again, if anybody is not convinced yet that the AI boom is upon us and we are just going to continue to see more and more advanced artificial intelligence moving into, depending on how you define AGI, advanced general intelligence, the computing power has largely been the ceiling. And if you look back over history, we've gone through AI winters, and it's largely been the result of the technology just couldn't keep up. We hit a ceiling in terms of its performance. And now with everyone seeing the potential of AI, where my observation over the years has been, we just didn't necessarily, a lot of people didn't understand what to do with it. And so there was only very specialized and used in specific use cases. And now as we've seen this just broad brush of applications and opportunity it's creating, everybody's getting behind it. And now there's all this pressure to say, well, how do we not hit a ceiling? And so I think that's what you're seeing with the government throwing money at Intel, saying, hey, get in the game. We need you to figure out how we stay ahead of this. I think that's exactly why you're seeing Nvidia going just gangbusters on their chipset. But it just goes back to something that I say over and over and over again is that, we look at how fast things are moving and it's really easy sometimes to go, I just wish it would slow down. I wish we would slow down. But oftentimes it's us, the consumers, that actually play a role in this stuff. As we demand more and more stuff from technologies, we want things faster. Even our own consumer behaviors, we often don't recognize how this translates to some of the chaos that we're experiencing right now. It's like if you feel overwhelmed by everything going on, well, in some ways, our consumer behavior is what drives it because nothing's ever fast enough. Nothing's ever good enough. We always want more. We always want the next generation of things. And I won't just say, well, you as an individual should go out and protest and say, I'm not going to participate in this and think that it's just going to put the toothpaste back in the tube, because it's not. But I do want to challenge all of us to be thinking about what role do we play in some of this chaos that we're seeing in terms of the next best, got to go faster, got to move further, got to go further ahead. The arms war that we're seeing in AI and the advanced technologies, because I think all of us can probably take some simple steps to say, you know what, if we really truly do want things to slow down, which I think would be a wise and discerning position, we can actually help influence that. We maybe don't have total control of it, but the market goes where the consumers are. And as long as we keep demanding more and wanting more, there's going to be increased pressure on these organizations to just continue doing whatever it takes to reach the next level. So I think it's a reflection that I would encourage everyone to take on how fast is too fast and where are the opportunities in my own life to maybe slow things down. And, even a simple one, just as an example for me, I don't run out and buy all the latest tech. Even though I love tech, I don't go out and buy the latest stuff. My iPhone is, I don't know how many models old, because I just don't want to buy into the cycle of I always have to have the next best thing. I always have to have something that's marginally faster, things like that. Now, if there are times where there's a significant jump in performance, I might go, well, you know what? It's been about this time. I'm going to make the shift. I mean, I don't know how long I waited to get an Apple Watch, but it wasn't until the Ultra came out. Then the Ultra 2 came out, wasn't really a desire for me to move on. Now, I am not advocating that the way Christopher Lynn thinks about kind of resisting and fighting against this just demand for constant progress is for everyone. I think we all have our own paths that we're going to take, but I would actually encourage all of us to say, hey, what role might we be playing in driving some of the chaos that we're seeing in the world right now based on our own consumer and just professional and personal behavior? So that's the call out to anybody watching and listening at this who may be seeing this going, good grief, like this is moving super fast. It's like, yeah. And maybe there are things we all collectively can do to help slow that down instead of just hoping it's going to happen while behaving the same way we always have. Now, the other interesting thing with this chipset update that I just wanted to kind of draw attention to, that if you've been following my stuff, is a little bit interesting to watch. You know, there's been a heavy emphasis on fusion power as we move into 2024 and beyond. And there's been some really interesting progress. I think it was 2 weeks ago where I talked about this, because I do know that some of the big players out there are looking at this going, there's a bit of an energy crisis that we're going to run into. So not only did we have the performance winters of the past, but we are going to get to a point where we're going to reach an energy winter where it's like, well, can we even generate the power required, or at what cost does it take to do this? Now, one of the things that's been interesting about Nvidia's new chipset is it delivers, well, claims in benchmarks 30 times the performance with a 25% reduction in energy consumption. Now, that's pretty impressive. And I think this is just an interesting factor to consider. One, I don't think it's going to slow down the drive for fusion power and some of the advancement there. But I think one of the things that this illustrated for me as I was reflecting on what happened with this chipset and how it was changing things is, you know, I talk a lot about how so often we look at advancements in technology as, you know, how do we move things forward within the box that we're in today? And what I thought was really unique and interesting about NVIDIA's innovation in this is they decided how to make a different box. And they said, okay, we know we need more performance, but rather than just saying, well, more performance means we need more power, we need more of this, what if we could figure out a way to innovate more performance while requiring less? And I think this goes back to, you know, even what I was saying before of the intentional decisions we can make in our lives to go, how can we still move forward without necessarily requiring greater consumption or things like that? And so anyway, it'll be interesting to see how this thing advances. I think in some ways it's cool that we're thinking and finding new ways to innovate. In some ways, part of me has been kind of hoping and banking on we might hit a little bit of a performance ceiling where the technology had no choice but to slow down, and the AI winters that we've experienced in the past might actually give us some breathing room in this, which all signs indicate that we're nowhere near seeing anything like that right now, at least from where I'm sitting and the way I'm looking at things. But time will tell, and I guess through these weekly updates, it's always interesting to kind of look back at what my updates are and see what things I talked about and how within a matter of weeks things change so quickly. But that's what's been going on in the chip wars, at least the biggest ones that have caught my attention. Moving on, continuing on the AI thread, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Apple and their AI and what we may expect to see as consumers and what this all means for us. Now, if you didn't hear, Apple acquired a company called Darwin AI. I think it was last month. It was earlier this year, that really specializes in explainable AI. So I'm going to kind of list some of the things that have happened, and then I'm going to talk about some of the observations or reflections I'm having on what does this really mean for things and where might this go. The other one is this week they also announced, this was a bit of a shocker, but actually not the more I reflected on it. Apple's in talks with Google, and not just Google, OpenAI as well, but about actually integrating. The big one that made the headlines was putting Google Gemini on iPhones, which seems just almost like a heresy. But, okay, so what happens if all of a sudden Apple decides to use Google's AI in its phone? And why would they do that? Why wouldn't Apple just create their own? Well, I think there's more to it than that. They're also talking about this advancement in multimodal AI models that they're investing in. And so, what does it all mean? I think a couple things that are on my mind as I'm watching some of these changes is the major boom around generative AI, this kind of first generation stuff that we've seen in 2022, 2023, now into 2024, is it's not going anywhere, but it's kind of moving into this stage of steady state. At least that's my observation and my predictions based on what I'm seeing with both Microsoft, their hire of Mustafa Suleyman, and kind of the acquisition that brought of Inflection AI with them, that this idea of people running out and trying to create their own massive large language models that can do what a chat GPT or a Google Gemini or Anthropic, what's it, Cloud 3, what they can do with theirs. I think what we're seeing with this is those are kind of moving into these are the big players, and they're just kind of the big players. And I think that was an indication of Apple kind of going, well, we could go out and try and create our own consumer version of Gemini or ChatGPT or Cloud 3, but why would we? And I think it's very indicative of a lot of the moves Apple makes. And I think it's telling, to at least for me, of where AI is going, and that what we're seeing right now around a lot of the hype and what AI is doing is already starting to move into steady state mode, which now starts to open the table for, so what's next with this? And if you look at what Apple did when they acquired Darwin, when you look into what Darwin does, there's this heavy focus on explainable AI. And when you look at some of the other big AI companies and what they're doing, and even Apple moving into this multimodal AI models, these advanced models that have a greater emphasis on explainable AI, a greater emphasis on some of the ethical implications and fixing some of the problems in the more sustainable, or not sustainable, but the more broad use AI models that are out there. We're starting to see the makings of what the next generation, I believe, is kind of this next generation of advanced AI is. And I don't know that we're necessarily seeing the output of all of this quite yet. One example, though, is as I was looking into Apple and what they're doing, and I think it's Ferret is one of their AI models that allows you to actually modify specific things within an existing image. So you can, again, without having to know Illustrator and all this other stuff, you can just say, hey, I want to change the background, or I want to swap this out on an existing photo. We're starting to see these more advanced AIs start to bubble up. They aren't mainstream yet, but I think this is what we're seeing with Apple and them saying, you know what, we're fine with putting Gemini on our iPhones because that's a more generic generative AI model. Where I think we're going to see Apple start to invest in some of these much more advanced AI models that are specialized. And I think we're past the age, not past, but we're moving out of the age of this kind of general artificial intelligence and moving into this more advanced, again, the multimodal, the more advanced AI models, where we're going to start see it doing some different and unique things. And honestly, as I'm sitting here talking about it, it might be like, well, like what, Christopher? And my thoughts are, I'm not quite sure yet. I mean, I've been in conversations with some folks who are doing some pretty interesting stuff. I can't necessarily talk publicly about it, but I think this is where I don't know that we've quite figured all this out. And watching what some of the big players in the space are doing, I think is an indicator that we're moving into the next generation of what artificial intelligence is, which may be discouraging for some of you who are listening or watching this going, good grief, like I'm not even caught up with what happened in 2022. And now we're saying that's moving into steady state mode, and we're going to move on to whatever the next generation of this stuff is. That may be overwhelming. I think in some ways, least some of the things I'm seeing, it's actually encouraging to me because there's a little more, well, not a little, I think a lot more energy and focus on, hey, what specifically are we trying to do with this? And let's really make sure it does a really great job at that. And it's explainable and we understand how it's working. And we have the ability to tweak the dials and the methods to make it do what we need it to do really well versus I feel like the early generative AI models, they were a little like fast and loose, and it was a little bit of the wild, wild west in terms of what they could do. And that brought with it a lot of risk. And so, if anything, I'm encouraged and we'll continue to kind of watch where this goes. And I'm optimistic that as we move into this next phase, we'll have learned from some of the mistakes of these early models and we'll begin to start saying, hey, like, yes, we are moving towards more advanced AI, but we're doing it in a more surgical, thoughtful approach rather than, hey, we've got AI. Like, why don't we just blast this on anything with limited controls on what it can do and wild capabilities that we often can't undo. And so, if anything, what's happening with Apple, and maybe it's just my personal perception of Apple, but Apple usually isn't always the first to come into the game. But when they do, they come in with a flavor and an intention that's very different. And I've got some anti-Apple friends that I hang with that they even agree with me on that. That normally by the time Apple comes into the game, they come in with a different flavor, a different approach than you've historically seen with the other. They kind of stay out of that initial hype phase. So given the fact they're still on track with some of the stuff that they're looking at doing by the end of this year, I think we're going to start to see some of these advancements as early as this year and start to see what that looks like. But I also think them partnering with Gemini is, again, if they go with Gemini or OpenAI, either way, whatever they end up doing, I think it goes back to this stuff is going to start just integrating into everything we do. So it's not going to be I have to go to Chat GPT to do this thing anymore. It's going to be, well, that's just built into, Siri. You just ask Siri, here's what I'm trying to do. Can you help me with this? And no, it's no longer the rules-based thing that Siri was before. Now it's just a generative AI model that is much more advanced in terms of how it can help and what it can do. And again, just further integrating into our lives. So that was a lot of kind of off the cuff reactions and reflections that I've been having over this week watching the Apple stuff that I don't necessarily just think present themselves on the surface of, okay, they bought Darwin AI, they're talking to Google. What does that all mean? I think there's a lot more under the surface of what we can anticipate seeing play out here in the coming months. And I'm optimistic. I guess that's my best assessment on it is I'm optimistic that what we'll see here in the coming future will be a positive one. Now, on that note, speaking of positive moves in the generative AI and AI creation space, the YouTube has, I can't remember if it's rolled out. I haven't seen it in my creator studio yet, but maybe it is. It either is rolled out or it's coming out where now creators actually have to tag any of the content that they put on YouTube with, do you have AI generated realistic content in your videos? Which I think, again, is an indication of companies recognizing the risk and the dangers of some of this stuff and trying to do their best to put some guardrails in place and say, all right, this technology's here. We can't put the train back in the station. But now what are we going to do to start trying to govern and at least help people be more informed? Right. And I appreciate the way YouTube is doing this. I think there's some wisdom in the way they're approaching it that we all can consider as we think about artificial intelligence and where it's going. And that, YouTube's not banning AI generated content. It's not saying you can't put it up here because to that point, it recognizes, well, trying to police it through compliance is going to be very difficult or just restricting it. It's everywhere. People have access to it. So to just simply tell people you can't do it won't work. And all that's likely going to do is drive people to try and get better at figuring out how to create the content that the systems won't detect. But I think it's just this recognition that, hey, why don't we just recognize this is where we're going? AI generated content is going to be a thing, but let's just help people be informed by it. Now, the part that I'm interested to dig into as this continues to roll out is one, what kind of accountability do they have in place? Is this just the honor code of, as a creator, you're just saying, yeah, no, I didn't use AI content. Are there things underneath that are actually trying to detect if there is AI generated content inside of the video, which would be, in my opinion, very difficult to detect unless somebody's just raw creating an AI generated video and uploading it to YouTube. If you're incorporating an AI generated video into your existing videos, that would become very difficult to detect and track, in my opinion. And so it'll be really interesting to see how they do it and how they manage it, and what kind of accountability is in place for this. Because this, to me, I've got somebody who reached out. I cannot remember his name, but I'm going to have him on the show to talk about deep fake technology and where that's at, and some of the risks associated with it, and why we need to be paying close attention to that. For those of you who are watching, sorry, I'm messing with my camera because it completely froze. And so I think it's a noble move by YouTube to recognize, hey, this is a thing, and we can't just pretend it's not here. But how do we start to put governance around it? And I think to anybody, parents, whoever, I think these kind of steps of going, well, the AI is here and it's going to be more integrated into the things that we do. So how do we manage and govern around it, rather than trying to either ban it or just say, well, it's here and there's just nothing we can do about it? And these are some of the early stages and early steps that we're starting to see. And I think we all will benefit from stuff like this. And I think we need to find more ways to do what YouTube is doing in different channels. I know that, I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Facebook was doing something to try and catch AI generated content. And I'm sure we're going to start to see this everywhere as this continues to blow up all over the place. Okay. So let's move on to the continuation of the humanoid robots that, if, so here's another one. I can't remember. I think it was a year ago that I did a podcast. I was talking with someone and they had talked about the fact they thought we were still a good 10, 15 years out from robotics. And at the time, it kind of made sense. But this humanoid robots, wow, has this one moved quick at the end of 2023 and 2024. I don't know, those of you who are watching, I don't know, watching or listening, I don't know how tech savvy some of you are and how close you follow this, or if you're just kind of, this is your channel to kind of stay up to date on it. But I went from the occasional like video clip of Musk showing, Optimus here and there, and it was this very futuristic, very distant future, to now on a regular basis, I am seeing new companies who are getting into the humanoid robot space. I'm seeing new applications of this pop up all over the place. And this week was no shortage of it. We're only in March, and Mercedes implemented, and this was a company that I was less familiar with. I didn't even know they were really getting into the humanoid robot game. It's a company called Apollo. They're Apollo robots. And Mercedes has actually legit implemented these in its manufacturing sites. So it's not only just like proof of concept. Yeah, these AI robot companies are creating these things off in the stratosphere, but we got years to go before they actually start making their way into things. Mercedes has actually implemented them. Now, granted, where they are right now, I would still say the robots are relatively, dumb, if you will, in terms of their capability. That where Mercedes is using them is they're using them for extremely physically intensive things that require a very low skill, which is about right for where AI is. And then these robotics, where it's like, yeah, if it's something that is repeatable, consistent, and you always need to do the same thing, not a lot of variability, requires some sort of, physicality that is probably too taxing for a human being, I can see where it's starting to move in. But I think the fact that already we're starting to see these humanoid robots starting to move into major, players, and it's only March of 2024, it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes in the rest of the year and moving forward. Now, there was another one I came across the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. There's a mouthful for you. The cast KAIST. Anyway, they have a humanoid robot now that they have created or built. I don't remember if they built it or they bought it, but either way, the thing is capable of piloting an airplane. Nvidia came out, which I talked about them before. I mean, Nvidia is just really going gangbusters in the tech space right now, but they're getting in the game of humanoid robots, which would again make sense. They're in the hardware space. They're investing heavily in advanced AI. So it would make sense that they would also play in there. It'll be interesting to watch what they do if they end up staying in the actual space. But in some ways, it would make sense since they're a hardware provider. And I actually see these humanoid robots just becoming, it's like a hardware product type of a thing. Then you've also got Figure, you've got Optimus. So there are all these players out there that are making some massive strides in humanoid robots that I think a lot of people in the tech space thought, oh, we got a ways to go before we're going to start seeing these things, walking around. And again, whether we see them out, I think we've got some time before we see them out in the public square, but in the professional sphere, I would love to hear from somebody who may be out there. And I know there's folks who are working around robots today, but the robots that we often see today doing things are more, it's equipment that has robotics built into it. It's not necessarily an autonomous humanoid robot moving around doing different things. So it'll be really interesting to see how this one continues to advance. And I'm actually curious, the one thing that got me thinking as I was thinking more about these humanoid robots, it goes back to the accountability game with this. I think it's a little easier for us to see that the human behind the computer is the one who's truly accountable when it's something like an on-screen AI. Oh well, our chat bot did this, and it's like, yeah, but it's like an on-screen thing, and you're responsible for implementing that thing. I'm curious as we start getting these things that have, I mean, we're going to get to a point where they're going to get personhood, or we're likely going to have to cross that boundary where, these things are given personhood. Then where does the accountability go? Would you feel comfortable? I'm actually curious. Would you feel comfortable getting on a plane if as you get on the plane, there's just two steel robots sitting up front? And it's an interesting question that I think a lot of people thought, oh, we're not going to ever have to deal with that in our lifetime. And I think we're very much going to be dealing with that in our lifetime. And what is our comfort level with that? And, what's interesting about that, my wife at one point was a flight attendant, and so very familiar with the airline industry. I mean, it's not like machines haven't been flying airplanes for a long time. And I know I'm thinking of this as a specific use case, but it has broader implications. It's not a new thing. It's not a new thing for, a robot to be flying an airplane. Autopilot has been around for a very long time. But what happens when now the robot is the actual person up there? Because one of the reasons that I know I even personally was more comfortable with, autopilot and things like this was there was a person there. So when things hit the fan, you had that kind of dynamic human being that could take over and kind of man the wheel or woman the wheel, whatever, should things go south. Well, if all of a sudden you've got a bunch of robots who are actual physical beings up there taking up, there's not a person up in the cockpit anymore. Where does that put us in terms of comfort and accountability? And how does it work if things go wrong? These are some of the deeper questions that as these machines start going from these kind of ethereal, they're on a screen, they're doing this, maybe it's a robot, but it's just a mechanical arm doing this and that, to a multimodal being that's doing different things. I think it's going to be a very interesting rest of 2024 and interesting couple of years to come. So curious what others' thoughts are on this, and I'm gonna stop there before I go too far down a path. But last one. So if you remember last week, I was a little bit a lot bit frustrated with some of the return to work nonsense that I just continue to see blowing up, where companies are going to just seemingly ridiculous levels to force people back into an office when all the data, all the research is showing that people are extremely effective and they perform better when they are given the flexibility and autonomy they need to be successful. And so it's very interesting to see this. And this week, there was yet two more things I encountered that was just discouraging. So the first was I had someone who was at an event and they heard the chief people officer of Priceline on the stage say that, the way the company's moving, they have decided that you can have a job at Priceline, but you can't have a career and be remote at Priceline. And I just thought, man, if the senior most people in the company have this limited mindset about how work can be done and you're putting a ceiling on people's capabilities like that, what else, what are the implications of that? And the announcement that came out this week that just about sent me over the edge on Monday was Dell came out and I don't know whether it was completely public, but it's public now, came out and just made it clear that they have told all their employees that, yeah, you can keep your job if you're remote. It's fine. You can keep your job. However, you will be ineligible for a promotion and you will be ineligible to move to any other position in the company. You are essentially stuck right where you are right now. And this one in particular rubbed me the wrong way because of the very just discriminatory nature of it, by saying, I don't really care about your performance or how well you perform or what you've done to this organization or what you have the capability of doing. All I care about is you being here and what that sends to an organization and all the employees within it about how the company runs, which is really unfortunate because I've had some friends who've worked at Dell and historically they've been big fans of Dell and its culture and where it was going. In many ways, they were one of the companies that I had held in high regard for kind of pioneering some of the alternative ways of working and bringing out people's best in creative and different ways. And so to see this kind of backslide, I don't know what's going on. And again, I know enough people in the senior leadership space to know many of them are well intentioned. These aren't, monsters just sitting in a room trying to destroy the lives of their employees. But what often gets missed is there's this tendency to have, as a senior leader, want things to be accommodating to yourself instead of recognizing, well, it's not really about me. It's about the people who are actually out here doing the work. And so how do I meet them where they are instead of me expecting them to meet me where I am? And so I see some of that. I know someone had shared with me some of the details of some of the tax laws, which are very interesting, and how if states decide to enforce some of these residency tax laws, I understand the financial pressure companies may be in. So I'm sensitive to why companies are in a really, really difficult spot right now. A lot of senior leaders are struggling with a lot of things. And oftentimes when we struggle, we try and gravitate and grab on and hold tightly to the things that are most familiar to us, the things that we're comfortable with, and things that are different than that. But it was just discouraging to see yet again this trend of companies going back to this draconian kind of restrictive, hey, you got to just do things how we see fit, regardless of whether it's in your best interest. And someone I'm close with had shared, they saw my post and then they had posted about it. And one of the things they had talked specifically about was the audiences who are most affected by these kinds of decisions. And the audiences that are affected the most are often, in my opinion, some of the most vulnerable, because they are, females are heavily affected by this, people who prioritize family, people who prioritize, and there's been a ton of data coming out that flexibility is great for building a diverse workforce, an inclusive workforce. I just had a one-on-one virtual coffee with somebody the other day, and she shared with me that, she's typically not typically, she's a petite female that most of her career has felt was not taken seriously because of her appearance and how she showed up. And being virtual was a great equalizer because everybody's head is about the same. Everybody's torso looks about the same on a virtual screen. And so some of these things that just statistically inhibited her in the past have been equalized. And so when I see things like this and go, really, we're going to go back to some of these ways. And I'm not blind to the fact that sometimes there are legitimate reasons that companies have to make tough choices. And ultimately, it is within their power to make them. Yet at the same time, when all the data supports otherwise, I truly don't understand why companies would, well, I do understand why ultimately this stuff happens. It just makes me sad when I see this stuff. And regardless of, the position you're in, I know that I have a fair amount of young folks that listen to this. As you move up, I think this is a huge opportunity to change at the top how we think about leadership and how we think about running an organization. Because I can tell you from my experience, time and time and time again, it isn't it's a false dichotomy that investing and caring about your people is taking away from your organizational effectiveness and performance. If anything, I see it just be a win-win time and time again. Now, I'll close on a happy note because one of the things that made my week was there was a viral video that went around by a CEO called Tom Hunt. Well, of course, that's his name. I can't remember the company he's the CEO of. But anyway, he released this viral video of himself just saying, you don't need to tell me why you need to take time off work. If you need to go pick up your kids from school, great. If you need to go to a doctor's appointment, great. If you need to take time off because you've got something of death in the family, fine. I trust you to get your job done. And to me, that was hope. That was a very encouraging and bright light amidst kind of some of the dark chaos right now as companies are just reeling and going back to some of the ways that they're familiar with, but that are just destructive to an organization and the people within it. And so to see that, hey, at least there's still a few folks out there fighting the good fight, trying to do what's best for not only their people, but ultimately their companies win in the end too. And I hope that more companies don't buy into the social contagion that's going on right now of like, well, all these other companies are making this move. I might as well jump on the bandwagon too. So with that, that is my update for this, third week or something like that of March. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday and a wonderful weekend. We will see you on the other side.